The coffee was cold by the time I noticed. I'd been staring at the case file for 3 hours, a habit from my 30 years on the force that hadn't died when I retired. The file itself wasn't mine. It was just a printout Rivera had sent over, pages stapled together with the kind of urgency that police captains reserve for cases that don't fit normal categories. Max, my German shepherd, lay across my boots, his weight a familiar anchor. His breathing was deep and rhythmic, the sound of a dog at peace. The rain hammered against the cabin windows in that steady rhythm that made everything outside feel distant, unreal, as if the forest and I existed in a separate atmosphere from the rest of the world. 30 miles from town, surrounded by pine and silence, I'd built a life that asked nothing of me except to keep breathing. I chopped wood. I walked Max through trails that never changed. I read books about philosophy and ancient history. I drank coffee at my own pace. I'd spent years learning how to be alone without feeling lonely, how to let the weight of other people's violence settle somewhere other than my chest. It was working, mostly. Until the phone rang. The call came on a Tuesday morning in late October. I told people I was done with police work, done with other people's nightmares. Mostly, I meant it. But when Captain Rivera's voice crackled through the phone, low and urgent, something in me recognized the pitch. The sound of a case that wouldn't fit the boxes, the kind of sound that kept veteran cops awake at 3 a.m. "Jake, I wouldn't ask if it wasn't necessary." I didn't answer right away. Max's ear twitched at the tone. He knew that voice. He knew what it meant. "We found a woman," Rivera continued. 28, maybe 30. Been living in an abandoned warehouse on Riverside for months. No identification. She hasn't spoken a word since we brought her in. Not trauma silence, medical silence. Her throat's been damaged, deliberately. The rain sounded louder suddenly. I could hear the individual drops hitting the gutters, a percussion that demanded attention. "Why call me?" I asked, though I already knew. "Because she has a dog. A German shepherd mix, won't let anyone near her except the dog. And she keeps drawing the same symbol over and over, on paper, on the walls of her holding room, a circle with 3 lines through it. Jake, I think she's trying to tell us something, and I think she's terrified. Whoever did this to her, they wanted her silent, permanently." I looked down at Max. His amber eyes met mine with that uncanny knowing dogs possess. He'd worked victim recovery for 8 years before I retired. Search and rescue, missing persons, sometimes worse. He'd learned to read human suffering the way most dogs read food smells. He knew what scared meant. He knew what trauma looked like when it walked into a room. "I'm not a detective anymore, Rivera." The words felt hollow the moment I spoke them. We both knew it was a formality, a token protest. "You're the only one she's shown any response to besides her dog," dispatch said when they mentioned retired cop with German shepherd. She stopped shaking. She drew that symbol again, faster. "Jake, she's reaching out. She's just doing it the only way she can." The silence between us held the weight of old choices. I'd left the force to stop carrying other people's suffering in my chest. I'd left to find peace in solitude, in the space between trees and water where the world made sense through simplicity. I'd left because I was tired of seeing what humans could do to each other and still be called human. But I'd never been good at saying no when someone needed help. It was my original sin, the reason I'd joined the force in the first place, the reason I'd stayed for 3 decades, and the reason I'd only managed to retire through sheer exhaustion rather than any real choice. "Where is she?" "County Hospital, psychiatric hold, 4th floor." I arrived at dusk with Max on a loose lead. The rain had softened to a steady mist that clung to everything, the parking lot, the hospital walls, my jacket. It was the kind of weather that made the world feel soft and dangerous at the same time. Max moved beside me, with the focus he'd trained into over years of work, his breathing even, his body language calm but alert. He'd been here before, in situations where human suffering was the only currency. Rivera met us in the hallway outside room 412. She looked exhausted, the kind of tired that came from holding space for someone else's terror all day. Her uniform was still pressed, but her eyes had that distant quality of someone who'd seen something they couldn't unsee. "She's been asking for you," Rivera said. "Not in words, she drew a picture. She showed me a sketch on lined hospital paper. It was crude but unmistakable. A man's silhouette with a dog beside him. The proportions were off, the man too tall, the dog too large, but the intent was clear. Recognition, hope, desperation rendered in pencil. And beneath it, the same circle with 3 lines through it, drawn so hard the pencil had nearly torn through the paper. "The symbol," I said. "She's drawn it 47 times since we brought her in. On every piece of paper we give her. On the walls, with charcoal from a plant pot she broke. It's obsessive, Jake. It means something. It means everything to her." I looked through the observation window. The woman sat on the edge of the hospital bed, motionless. Her hair was long, matted, the color of old straw. Her wrists showed ligature marks, old ones, healed into white scars that spoke of months or years of binding, and fresher ones underneath that spoke of recent captivity, recent struggle. But it was her throat that made something cold settle in my stomach. Bruising in the shape of hands, purple deepening to black, with what looked like surgical scarring beneath. The kind of scarring that doesn't come from accident or temporary violence. Whoever had done this hadn't been quick about it. Whoever had done this had been methodical. The woman's eyes were fixed on nothing. She wasn't catatonic. There was a tension in her shoulders, a readiness in her posture, but she was somewhere else, somewhere deep inside where the noise couldn't reach her. "Can I go in?" I asked. "She needs to see the dog first. That's the only thing that calms her." I unclipped Max's lead. He moved into the room with his old training intact, not aggressive, not intrusive, just present. The presence of a being that knew suffering and didn't judge it. The woman's entire body convulsed when she saw him, not in fear, in recognition, in something like salvation. She reached out and her hand shook so badly I thought she might break something inside herself. Max approached slowly, his tail lowering in respect, and rested his head on her knee. It was the posture of a dog who'd done this before, who understood that sometimes the most powerful thing you could offer was simple acceptance. She made a sound then, not a word, not quite a cry. Something between. Her mouth opened and closed like she was trying to push sound through a door that had been welded shut. Her hands came up to her throat, clutching at the scarring there, and her face twisted with the effort of attempting something that had been stolen from her. "It's okay," I said quietly, stepping closer but not too close. "You're safe now." But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. The symbol on the papers, the precision of her injuries, the deliberate damage to her voice, none of this was accident. Someone had orchestrated this silence, this erasure. Someone had decided that this woman's words were dangerous enough to destroy her ability to speak them, and we needed to understand why. The woman's eyes finally moved, tracking from Max to me. For just a moment, I saw something in them, a flicker of intelligence, of will, of someone still fighting from beneath the weight of whatever had been done to her. She pointed at me, then at Max, then back at the paper with the drawing. The question was silent, but unmistakable. "Can you help us?" Rivera stood in the doorway, watching. I could feel the weight of her hope, the desperate belief that I might be the one person who could untangle this. Max stayed with the woman, his presence a steady force. I watched them, the broken human and the steady dog, and I felt something shift inside me. The careful walls I'd built, the intentional distance I'd cultivated, The peace I'd constructed in solitude, all of it suddenly seemed selfish in the face of someone who had no walls left, no distance left, nothing left but a dog and a man she'd never met, and a symbol she kept drawing because it was the only language she had left. "Tell me everything," I said to Rivera, "from the beginning." And as she began to speak, I realized I wasn't going back to my cabin tonight. Max knew it too. I could see it in the way he'd settled beside the woman, no longer in the posture of a visitor, but in the posture of someone who'd made a commitment. We were in this now, whatever this was. The symbol on the wall caught the fluorescent light, circled with 3 lines through it, a warning, a plea, a riddle. And somewhere in the city beyond the hospital walls, someone knew exactly what it meant. Rivera led me to the basement conference room, where they'd set up a makeshift incident board. The fluorescent lights hummed with that hospital frequency that made everything feel slightly surreal. Max stayed upstairs with the woman. Rivera had arranged for a quiet room where they could be together. I could feel the rightness of that decision in my bones. The board was sparse, but deliberately organized. Photographs of the woman's injuries, medical reports, the warehouse where she'd been found. But what caught my attention was the wall covered entirely with her drawings. 47 circles with 3 lines through them, each one slightly different in pressure or angle, but the symbol absolutely consistent, obsessive, the kind of repetition that comes from trauma encoded into muscle memory. "We ran her prints," Rivera said, pulling up a file on her laptop. "Nothing. No criminal record, no missing person report that matches. No dental records on file anywhere. It's like she didn't exist before she ended up in that warehouse." "Someone made her not exist," I said quietly. Rivera nodded. She understood the distinction. "The warehouse manager found her 3 days ago during a routine inspection. She was in the back office, semi-conscious, dehydrated. There was a dog with her, German Shepherd mix, maybe 5 years old, severely malnourished. Both of them had been there for months, best estimate. The dog was protecting her. When officers first approached, it positioned itself between them and the woman. Didn't attack, but made it clear, you get through me first." I studied the photographs more closely. The warehouse was industrial, abandoned, the kind of place where sound wouldn't travel far. The office where they found her had a single window, boarded up, chains on the walls, a makeshift bed, water bottles, some empty, some with residue at the bottom. "Whoever kept her there," I said, "knew she might be found eventually. They kept her hydrated, basic survival needs. That's not abandonment." "That's what I thought too," Rivera said. "That's control. That's someone checking in, someone who wasn't done with her." She pulled up more files. "The medical examiner found evidence of old breaks, both arms. 3 ribs, left leg, healed injuries spanning at least 2 years, maybe more. The throat damage is recent, within the last 6 months, the examiner thinks. The surgical scarring suggests someone deliberately severed or severely damaged her vocal cords. It wasn't an accident, Jake. It was a procedure." My hands formed fists without my permission. Max would have noticed if he were here. He always did. Over the years, he'd learned to recognize the moment my heart rate spiked, the moment rage tried to claw its way up my throat. "And the dog?" I asked. "Veterinary examination shows similar patterns. Old fractures, malnutrition, signs of abuse, but also signs of care. Someone was feeding them, just barely. Someone was keeping them alive, but broken." "Bonding through trauma," I said. "If you break both the human and the animal together, isolate them, then show them small mercy, you create a dependency that looks like love, a captive and a keeper, a prisoner and a jailer, who's also the only source of comfort." Rivera looked at me with an expression that mixed confirmation and sadness. She'd known I'd understand this immediately. "There's something else," she said. She pulled up a photograph of the warehouse walls. In multiple places, the same symbol, circle with 3 lines through it. carved into the concrete, drawn in what looked like blood, scratched repeatedly into the metal door frame. "She did that," Rivera said. "The examiner confirmed the blood type matches hers. She was marking something, leaving a message, or maybe marking territory," I finished, "claiming space, the only space she had control over." I stood up and walked the length of the incident board. The puzzle of it was starting to form, not in details, but in structure. Someone had taken this woman, someone who'd had no identity, no records, no existence in the system. Someone had broken her over years. Someone had deliberately stolen her voice, and then someone had kept her alive in an abandoned warehouse, visited her regularly enough to maintain her survival, created a bond between her and a dog that was so profound the dog wouldn't let strangers approach her. None of this was random. None of this was opportunistic. This was architectural. This was designed. "The symbol," I said, turning back to Rivera. "Have you run it against anything? Gang markings, cult symbols, anything in the database?" "Nothing comes up. I had forensics check it against known groups in the region, state level, even federal databases. It doesn't match anything documented." "Then it's personal," I said. "It means something specific to her, to them, to whoever did this." I looked at the photograph of the woman again. Even in the hospital bed, even broken, there was something in her face that spoke of intelligence, of will. This wasn't someone who'd been randomly selected. This was someone specific, someone chosen. "I need to talk to her," I said. "Not tonight, tomorrow. Let her rest. Let her trust the dog. Let her start to believe she might be safe. But tomorrow, we need to understand what that symbol means." Rivera closed her laptop. "There's something else you should know. When we found her, she was clutching a photograph, laminated, worn. We've got it in evidence, but I thought you should see it first." She handed me an evidence bag. Inside was a photograph, faded and creased from repeated handling. It showed a young girl, maybe 14 or 15, standing next to a police officer. Both of them were smiling. The girl had dark hair and intelligent eyes, and wrapped around both of them, partially visible in the frame, was a German shepherd. My stomach dropped. "Is this—" I started. "We don't know," Rivera said quietly. "We don't have an identity for the woman upstairs. But that photograph is the only thing she had with her. She's been holding it since we brought her in. When we tried to take it for evidence, she had a complete breakdown. We let her keep it." I stared at the photograph, at the girl's smile, at the dog, at the police officer whose face I couldn't quite see in the frame. "I need the name of that officer," I said. "That's the problem." Rivera said, "I've already started checking. The uniform matches departments from this region, but I can't make out the badge number clearly enough. And without an identity for the woman, I can't cross-reference with missing persons reports. It's like someone deliberately made this untraceable." I handed back the evidence bag, but kept the image in my mind. A girl, a dog, a police officer. A photograph that someone had kept close through years of captivity and abuse. "Someone stole her voice," I said slowly. "But they couldn't make her forget. And whatever that symbol means, it matters enough that she drew it 47 times rather than try to communicate any other way." "So what do we do?" Rivera asked. "We find out who she is," I said. "And we find out what happened to make her worth keeping silent." Chapter 3. The First Pattern. I didn't leave the hospital that night. Rivera arranged for me to use the staff room next to the psychiatric ward. Max stayed with the woman. I could check on them every few hours, and the arrangement seemed to calm her more than anything the hospital could offer medically. Around midnight, I walked upstairs to find them both asleep, the woman's hand resting on Max's shoulder, his body curved protectively around her. I returned to the conference room and pulled everything we had into a coherent timeline. The medical examiner's report suggested the woman was approximately 30 years old, possibly younger. The old injuries dated back at least 2 years, possibly 5. The voice box damage was recent, within 6 months definitely. The dog was approximately 5 to 6 years old, which meant if the photograph showed both of them, it had been taken at least 11 years ago, possibly longer. But here was what kept circling in my mind. The photograph showed a smiling girl, a police officer, and a dog. The woman upstairs had been held captive in an industrial warehouse, and she'd held onto that photograph through every moment of it. I pulled out my phone and called an old contact at the State Police Archive. Captain Derek Hollis had been my partner for 5 years before I made detective. He'd retired 2 years ago, but still consulted on cold cases. The phone rang 4 times before his voice crackled through, rough with sleep. "Jake, it's past midnight. I need you to run something for me off the record," I said. "I'm sending you a photograph. It's evidence in a current case. I need you to identify the officer in it, and I need you to check if there's any missing person report filed that might correlate." There was a pause. I could hear Derek waking up, shifting into the mental space where old cops live when they're thinking about active cases. "Rivera called you in?" he asked. "Something like that." "Give me 20 minutes. I hung up and started making coffee in the staff room. The hospital brew was terrible, thin and acidic, but it was warm and it kept my hands occupied. Through the window, I could see the parking lot, the rain starting again, that October cold that settles into your bones. Max and I had left the cabin at 6 in the evening. It felt like weeks ago. My phone buzzed. Derek. "Jake, I've got something. The officer in that photograph is Captain Michael Reeves. He worked out of the North County Precinct from 1998 to 2014. He was decorated, commendations for bravery, community service awards, the whole profile of a good cop. But here's where it gets complicated. In 2013, his daughter was reported missing. Her name was Sarah. She was 15 years old. My hand tightened on the phone. Sarah was kidnapped from the parking lot of her school," Derek continued. "The case went cold after 6 months. No ransom demand, no contact from the perpetrators. Captain Reeves took a leave of absence in 2014 and never came back to the force. He left the state. There's no current address on file, but I'm seeing pension records. He's been collecting his retirement since 2014, and the money's being deposited to a bank in Maine." "Sarah disappeared in 2013, I said slowly. "That would make her approximately 30 now. The woman we have upstairs matches that age." "It gets worse," Derek said. "There was a note in the case file from 2013, handwritten, filed by Detective Patricia Moore, who was heading the investigation. It said, 'Captain Reeves claims his daughter sent him a symbol via anonymous email the day after her disappearance. A circle with 3 lines through it. He believes it's a coded message from the kidnappers, never able to confirm if symbol had meaning beyond personal significance." The room seemed to tilt slightly. I set down my coffee carefully. "Send me everything you have on that case," I said. "And Derek, be discreet. If Captain Reeves is still alive and still aware of this investigation, I don't want him knowing we're looking." "Already on it," Derek said. "Jake, if that woman is Sarah, if she's been missing for 11 years, then someone kept her alive deliberately," I finished. "And now we need to find out why." I ended the call and stood very still in the middle of the staff room. 11 years. A girl who'd been stolen from a parking lot, kept captive in an industrial warehouse, deliberately robbed of her voice. And a police captain who'd abandoned his career, left his state, and disappeared into a life of pension checks in Maine. The symbol wasn't a message from kidnappers. It was Sarah's way of marking herself, of saying, "I am still here, I am still real, I am still me." At 3 a.m., I went upstairs and found Sarah still asleep, her hand still resting on Max. I stood in the doorway and let the weight of her story settle into my chest. 30 years old and stripped of every identity marker except a photograph and a symbol. A dog that had survived alongside her through years of captivity. And a retired cop who'd been living in Maine, possibly still breathing, possibly still walking free. I pulled out my phone and texted Rivera, "I know who she is. Sarah Reeves, missing since 2013. Her father was Captain Michael Reeves, North County Precinct. The woman upstairs was kidnapped from a school parking lot when she was 15. The response came back almost immediately. "Jesus, Jake. That's an 11-year-old case. We're opening this up. Are you ready?" I looked at Sarah's face in the hospital light, at Max guarding her, at the photograph still clutched in her hand. "No," I typed back, "but we're doing it anyway. CTA, embedded. If you're following this rescue so far, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from." Chapter 4. The Keeper's Shadow. By dawn, we had preliminary confirmation. Detective Patricia Moore, who'd led the original investigation into Sarah's disappearance, still worked in the department. She'd been promoted to lieutenant in the intervening years. Rivera brought her into a separate conference room at 6 a.m., and I watched through the observation window as Rivera laid out what we'd discovered. Moore's face went through several colors. Shock, then guilt, then something that looked like anger. Possibly at herself, possibly at the years that had passed. "We never found anything," Moore said, her voice rough. "Not a single lead that held up. The parking lot had limited camera coverage. There were 3 cars in the lot at the time. We interviewed everyone associated with Sarah's school, her family, anyone within a 2-mile radius. Nothing, and Captain Reeves. He withdrew, became inaccessible. We couldn't work the case the way it needed to be worked because the father was too close to the department, and leadership decided it was a conflict of interest to have him involved." "Did you ever pursue the symbol?" I asked, stepping into the room. Moore looked at me. She knew who I was, or at least she knew I was the retired cop Rivera had called in. "The circle with 3 lines. We ran it. Nothing. Reeves was certain it was a message from the kidnappers, a taunt, but we found no evidence of contact between him and any suspects, no ransom note, no demands. It was like Sarah had evaporated." "She didn't evaporate," I said. "She was kept alive in an abandoned warehouse on Riverside for 11 years. Moore's hands gripped the edge of the table. "That's not possible. Someone would have seen something. A girl kept in captivity for 11 years. There would be traces, reports, something." "Unless," Rivera said carefully, "she wasn't kept in one place the entire time. Unless the keeper moved her. Unless the keeper had resources and knowledge of how to avoid detection. Like a police officer," I said quietly, "would have." The room went absolutely silent. "You think Captain Reeves took his own daughter?" Moore's voice was disbelieving, but her eyes were already working through the logic. "I think someone took Sarah," I said. "I think that someone has kept her alive, kept her drugged enough to manage, kept her isolated enough that she couldn't communicate. And I think whoever that someone is, they're still in this picture. Because Sarah is afraid, terrified actually, and not in the way that a victim of random kidnapping would be. She's afraid of someone specific, someone who has power over her." I pulled out the photograph that had been in Sarah's possession. This shows Sarah approximately 11 years ago, with a police officer whose face isn't fully visible, and a German shepherd. I need to know, were there police dogs involved in the original investigation? Moore leaned forward, studying the photograph. "Not from our department, but the K9 unit from Central Precinct assisted with the search the first week, and—" She stopped. "There was an officer, a detective from North County, who was seconded to help with the investigation. Michael Reeves's former partner. They'd worked together for nearly a decade before Sarah disappeared." "Who?" I asked, though something in my gut was already forming the answer. Detective James Garrett, Moore said. He was instrumental in the early search efforts, completely committed. Even after the case went cold, he kept asking about it. But then, maybe 6 months after Sarah disappeared, he transferred to a different department, moved upstate. We lost touch. I felt something click into place, the wrong piece. The piece that didn't fit the narrative we'd been constructing. James Garrett, I repeated. Did he have a canine partner? German Shepherd, Moore confirmed. Black and tan. Beautiful dog. Everyone commented on how well trained it was. I walked to the window and looked out at the city waking up. 11 years ago, a girl disappeared. 11 years ago, a detective with access to police resources, knowledge of investigations, a trained dog, and proximity to the Reeves family simply pivoted, changed departments, moved upstate, and disappeared from the narrative entirely. I need everything you have on James Garrett, I said. Employment records, pension information, last known address, any personal files that might still be in the system. And I need it quietly, because if I'm right about this, he knows we're looking. And if he knows we're looking, Sarah is in danger. You think he's monitoring the investigation somehow? Rivera asked. You think a man who kept a girl captive for 11 years would have contingency plans, I said. I think he'd have ways to know if his case was being reopened, and I think the fact that Sarah was found now, that she was left in that warehouse where she could be discovered, might be part of a plan we don't understand yet. Moore stood up. I'll pull the files personally. No paper trail, no digital footprint if I can help it. There's something else, I said. Sarah still has that photograph. She's kept it through 11 years of captivity. The photograph shows the officer's body, but not his face. It's deliberate. The angle, the way she's positioned, the dog partially obscuring the identifying features. She knew she might need to hide his identity, or she knew that someday she might need to prove he existed. As Moore left to pull the old case files, I stood in the conference room and tried to understand the mind of a man who would take a girl, keep her alive for 11 years, deliberately damage her ability to communicate, and then, for reasons I couldn't yet fathom, allow her to be found. Either Garrett had made a mistake, or he'd made a choice. And I wasn't sure which option was more terrifying. Upstairs, Max would be with Sarah, keeping her safe. I needed to get back to them, but first I needed to understand the geography of this crime, the timeline, the motivations, because somewhere in this city, possibly still breathing, was a man who'd spent 11 years proving that he could steal a human being and keep her alive in the margins of society. And if I was right about who he was, he had the knowledge and resources to disappear again. This time, I needed to make sure he didn't take Sarah with him.